All right, we are live. Jimmy, why don't you just start by telling the people a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you're known for.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Jimmy Daly. Vail, Colorado is where I live. I feel very fortunate to be able to work remotely, live in a place I love. Um, I'm a longtime B2B content person. Started, gosh, in probably 2010, doing SEO and content writing for lawyers. That's kind of how I stumbled into this world. And over the past 10 years, have gone back and forth a few times from uh, agency side to in-house. Spent the last 3 or so years running sales and marketing at Animalz, a content agency. Um, so like if anyone, if you know me, that's probably where you know me from. And then just about a month ago, I started this new company, kind of a sister company to Animalz, where we're going to provide career resources for content marketers and then also help companies fill content roles. So yeah, that's like a decade in a minute.
Got you. So what ultimately, if I can ask, what ultimately made you step away from animals? Because that's a pretty big career decision. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, so I guess a couple things. One is that so Walter Chen, who founded Animalz, and until just a few weeks ago was the CEO of Animalz, is my business partner in Superpath. So he and I are going in on this together. That's kind of why I say it's a sister company to Animalz. I have only fantastic things to say about my experience there, and I hope in many ways that Animalz and Superpath, this new company, will be able to kind of partner up and support each other since we're both helping a lot of the same people, but in different ways.
Hmm.
The other thing is that Walter, I mean, truly, I'm inspired by his entrepreneurial journey, and he's encouraged this for a long time. And as we got kind of brainstorming and talking about this idea, it wasn't he wasn't saying, "Hey, don't leave." He was saying, "Hey, maybe I can support you." You know, yeah, I mean, he's a great guy in that sense. Um, but it was hard. I mean, though, I guess, sorry, one other thing is that I've had the itch, I've had the itch to try something on my own for a long time. This just opportunity felt so perfect,
Yeah.
support from a boss I've worked with for a long time, from a company that I loved and have a ton of respect for. And then also just this, what I feel is a pretty significant need in this world. So kind of those couple things came together and made it feel like the right time.
Nice. Just for the record, too, Tara commented when I posted that you were coming live with us. She said, "Animals is legit. I frequent their NYC happy hours. LOL."
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
So just piggybacking off that is that Animals is a remote company, correct? So
Yeah.
what is going on in New York City? Is it just do like random meetups or like how does that kind of?
Yeah, there's actually some kind of interesting backstory there. So when Walter started the company in summer of 2015, he was anti-remote. He wanted people in an office. And that's how Animals existed for probably 7 or 8 months. So like that initial period as he was getting things rolling, everyone was in the office. Um, and then something changed. There was a person he hired, a guy named Andrew Tate, who's still there. He was the very first employee, and his wife had a job opportunity elsewhere. And he came to Walter and said, this is a great opportunity for her. I want to support her. Can I keep working for Animalz? And after quite a bit of debate, Walter decided that that was the right move. And so then for a while it was hybrid. Anyone who lived in New York was expected to be in the office, and then slowly started hiring folks remote. Like I was a remote employee from Colorado. I think I was probably the first like true remote hire there. Um, and then over time, it changed. Like we started hiring more people from outside of New York than inside New York, and we downsized the office, and we downsized it again. Then we moved to a co-working space with just like two little rooms, and then eventually no one was going
Yeah.
anymore. And so it was a slow evolution. And in some ways that was nice because the company got to experience both sides of that, and because it was a little bit of a slower process, there was more time to figure out how it was all going to work before it was a totally distributed workforce.
Got you. And how many people were you when you said Walter didn't was big on in people in the office? How many people were in 2015? How many people were there at that time at the company?
Probably 7 or 8 people. It was pretty
Okay.
small. At one point, the New York office, the team was big enough there that we had to take over another floor. And so at that point, there might have been somewhere between 15 and 20 people. And it was funny. there was a loud floor and a quiet floor. So if you needed to write, you go to the quiet floor. If you got to get on calls or do something else, have a meeting with someone, go to the loud floor. I bet we maxed out around 20 though in the office.
Okay. And how did he ultimately make because it's, I've had business partners in the past who see it the same way. I'm all remote. All the companies that we run now are 100% remote. Especially now post COVID, I think it's a much warmer topic with a lot of companies. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
people are adults. They will do work at home. You know what I'm saying? Like, but was it that key employee that left and then was able to manage her own time and still be productive remotely that he was ultimately like, okay, now this just unlocks a whole new talent pool. It's cheaper. What was the ultimate kind of like?
I think I don't want to speak for Walter, but I think it was, I think he was pretty hesitant about it. And I think he could see that it was inevitable over time. The flip side of it, particularly for a company that was so young, was that there was a lot of feedback that was happening in the office on an hour by hour and minute by minute basis, just trying to figure out like, how does this company work? How do we make customers happy? Like all those things. I don't know that it would have happened in the same way had it been remote. Like Walter would stand over your shoulder and edit articles with you. Like that's how he was incredibly involved. He had a really, really high bar for quality. And so I think as it was shifting towards remote, he was hesitant for a while. Eventually it hit critical mass and there was no stopping it. And then we figured it out, by that point, the company he's not looking over everyone's shoulder anymore anyways. Like there's team leads, there's, editors we trust. There's all these things in place to make sure that people have good resources so they can do really good work.
And how many people are at Animalz now total?
Probably 51 or 52.
Okay. And those people, it's 100% remote.
Correct.
Okay. And in regards to, are all of those people in the US based or are they scattered across?
I would say 70% of folks are in the US, and then the rest in Europe.
The rest in Europe. Okay. And is there a reason for Europe? Is it just good talent popped up there? Or is there a different specific skill set that you're sourcing in Europe?
Just good talent. Like actually I'm trying to think of the folks we hired in Europe. I mean, they were like some superstars. Like some of our folks in Europe were like, I was so grateful to have the opportunity to work with them. Like it's crazy to imagine that might not have happened. There was also like increasingly as our customers were spread across the world, it made a lot more sense to have people, particularly in Europe. Like we had a number of customers in Europe, just having someone there who can like jump on problems a couple hours before folks on the East Coast, things like that. Like it just started to be easier and make more sense to hire folks abroad.
Got you. And how did that transition go? So you said that there was initially a lot of conversations, but at what point did you just draw a line in the sand? You said, we're just not going to hire local anymore. We're just going to hire remote. Like, was that a decision that you guys made as a company, or was that, again, just same thing? It's like, this person's really good, but they're in Austin, but they're really good. So let's hire them. Was it like, how did you guys kind of make that company transition?
Yeah. There was definitely some of that. I would say overall it was a slow burn. Like we had a couple remote folks early on who were really good, and bringing in someone who's experienced, who has worked remotely before, who's not just getting their career started. It's a lot easier. Like they just know how it all works. So they just go and they just do their job. And then it kind of shows the rest of the company like, this makes sense. Yeah. There was another thing though that happened early on, which was kind of interesting, which was that, Walter had this idea, which actually it turned out to be pretty good, where he wanted to hire young people who had just graduated from Ivy League schools. Okay. And so he would go and seek out people who are 23, 24 years old, just graduated from Yale, Princeton, Cornell, whatever, who didn't have any content marketing experience, but who were really intelligent and were willing to work really hard. There's plenty of people like that in New York. And so that's kind of an easy way to get rolling. It became difficult though. Like at some point we had to figure out the entire company can't be 24 years old with no content marketing experience. It's going to break, And so I think I was probably the first person that Walter hired that had been working in this field for, at that time, 6-7 years. And I had a whole network of people that I had worked with over the years who were remote, who were total pros. And, so I was able to sort of help make some connections there. And then trying to think, the next couple people that we hired that were remote, it's kind of similar deal. Like they were pretty experienced. They were not the kind of the same demographic that we had been hiring, that like 24-year-old person, smart, hardworking, but no experience,
Yeah. And when you guys interview, is there something different that you look for in a remote personality? Because I'm a remote person because I'm very much so an introvert. I like to put my head down for 8 hours and just work uninterrupted. Right. When I had an office with 40 people in it at one time, and like your time is their time at that point. Right. But when you're remote, you can kind of section your time a little bit better. I mean, is it just, we just at the point where like working remote, like everyone has the ability to work remote. They just, you know what I'm saying? Or is there a different type of personality type when you guys were interviewing, or no?
That's so interesting because I've been working remotely for about 7 years. And to be honest, I've almost forgotten that it's not like this everywhere,
I
And
do
so,
know. Yeah.
like the things that we would look for when hiring, like particularly those early stages, like we were hiring at that time much more based on potential than experience. So like we're looking for someone, there's a few things. Always writing samples. I mean, we're always analyzing writing samples, and there's things you can look for in a writing sample, whether that person has been doing it for 20 years or straight out of college. Like there's at least things you could look for that would identify good potential. So there's that. And then at that time also, in these early days, everybody was interacting with customers. And so we were like, you had to be able to get on a call like this and have an intelligent conversation. We had to have some level of confidence that you could get on a call with a customer after a little bit of training, and that customer would feel comfortable and trust you. Like, you know what you're doing. We failed a bunch. Turnover was a huge problem in the early days, much, much less so now that the company is fully remote, and for other reasons too. There was a number of things that we addressed to try to fix the turnover problem. One of the reasons, as a sort of an aside, why I'm sort of curious to explore this hiring space more with this new company is that hiring is so freaking hard. No matter who you're hiring for what role, remote, not, is just so difficult.
Yeah.
So there was I don't know that we ever kind of nailed down a great formula for it. We failed a bunch. We found some fantastic people. We asked those people for, to recommend peers, friends, whatever that they have worked with in the past and trust, all that stuff. But it was a slog, man. Sorry, I'm like going on and on. The other thing that's interesting about Animalz is that it's a people business. It's not a software company where we're going to build one product and sell to 100,000 people. Like every relationship with every customer is so important. And an agency can only scale as quickly as you can hire great people.
Yeah.
And so that was constantly putting pressure on our hiring because, Animalz, it's not a huge volume business. If you take on a handful of customers a month, it's a great month. But taking on 2 customers is actually an enormous undertaking because there's a bunch of people that have to be involved in that. And so, hiring is just like, not only was it difficult, hard to pin down exactly what made for a great employee or not, but there was this constant pressure to grow, which made it even harder to like get it right the first time, every time.
And with Superpath, are you guys going into anything hiring? Like, talk a little bit more about that. So you said it was resources for content marketers. Is that like trainings? Is that like community? Like what or hiring? What is involved in that?
Yeah. So there'll be a bunch of stuff for content marketers. And this is like, whether you're just getting started or whether you're head of content, VP, whatever, there will be resources for you. So there's a community already. I'm working on courses, blog, podcast, newsletter, all that good stuff. And then the other piece of it is helping fill content roles for companies. And there's a few things I've already been experimenting with that have proven to be useful so far. I got to figure out how to scale them. But like, for example, if you're hiring, I would ask you to get on a call like this and I would interview you and talk to you about the role. Like your job listing, or not but like job listings in general, they just lack so much context. Like, I want to talk to the person who's hiring. Tell me about the role. What's the day-to-day? Who do they work with? Talk about your benefits. What's the culture like all these things that people should ask when they apply. And then I'm actually going through and like writing up my own analysis of what I think of the job, not to be critical of it, but just to help people self-select. So I'll say, this is like a mid-career opportunity for someone with strong writing skills, but maybe not, maybe a little weaker on like account management. You'll work with these handful of people, et cetera, et cetera. So the biggest thing I'm trying to do is help people self-select for the roles so that companies can get really good people without having to sift through 1,000 resumes or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then hopefully training people so that we have lots more qualified people for these jobs.
Got you. We have a question from Jeff. He says, are there any tips for handling different time zones? We talked about that, but then he said different topic. Do you have to be careful about tax, employment law, et cetera, when you're hiring in different countries?
Yes, 100%. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I know there's we had a woman who for basically the entire time I was there was leading our people ops, and that was kind of her world to figure that stuff out, because it's not even just different country by country, but it's different state by state. There's a lot there.
Got you.
The time zone thing we solved primarily by grouping people in pods. So you have a handful of team leads working with a group of 3 to 5 people, and it's that pod's responsibility to figure out how they're going to deal with the very specific time zone problems that group of people has. And obviously, like, we try to group people together, maybe by time zone, but probably more so the types of customers they work on, the subject matter they write about, things like that.
And talk to me a little bit more about your teams and organization there. So you said they were in pods. How big are those pods? Is that pods determine, like, what are the kind of job roles that you guys have? Because I'm curious too, because you guys, Animalz, I don't keep saying you guys, Animalz just does content marketing only, correct? Only content marketing?
Well, content strategy,
Content strategy.
and then content creation. Yeah. I mean, that's the core of the business.
So they're actually writing the content.
Correct. And all that stuff is done in-house.
Okay.
So a pod would probably, the way the company was structured was that you have content managers. These are the folks who are creating the content. And they're involved in the strategy and they're involved in the account management, but their primary responsibility is content creation. Each of those folks would report to a strategist. A strategist is the leader of a pod. So that maybe they have 5 people, 6 people. We try not to make it any larger than that. The strategist is someone who likely had worked for Animalz for a while, had proven that they understood strategy, and then that person was responsible for creating the strategy for their customers, managing the communications between the customer and Animalz, and managing their team. So it is a tough job. It's a really tough job.
Yeah.
To manage all those different things. But we just found that if that content strategist knew their team, knew their customers, like they were always in the best spot to make decisions about our people and the customers. That's probably 90% of the company's content managers and content strategists. There's a people ops person. There's also a pool of editors. So the editors work across the whole company. And then there's also copy editors too. And so, occasionally a specific editor would need to work on a specific customer because of some subject matter expertise or whatever. But for the most part, we had a pool of editors so that things could keep moving quickly. And they were deliberately spread across different time zones, so that folks could get stuff edited, basically 24 hours a day, and then get stuff delivered to clients quickly.
And were you hiring basically writers and then training them on content strategy?
Sometimes.
Or vice versa?
Sometimes. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of both. Like,
okay.
Certainly I can think of a couple people we hired that had pretty good marketing skills, but were not fantastic writers. Sometimes those people actually made really good strategists because they could speak the language. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then they could lean on an editor to get help on making sure their team's writing quality is really high. And then sometimes it was the exact opposite. Like, I can think of a few other folks who came in as writers and that was what they wanted to do, was just be individual contributors. But once they got their foot in the door, they blossomed, they thrived, and they were able to take on other roles and became strategists also.
That's cool. Yeah. I'm always curious as how other agency structures. I mean, basically what I do is I interview agency folks just weekly for the last 9 months now. And it's always fascinating because there's like no right or wrong way to do it. You basically have to develop a system that works for your company. people in our training platform, as you get more into the training world, you're going to see that people want as much of a done for you training as possible. It's just the way
Yeah.
that humans work. But I always tell folks that we give you a process to do SEO, very defined, all the deliverables, all that and whatnot. But there's still an element of you having to take this and adapt it into your company. Like you're probably not going to have all the exact same roles that I do, even though it worked for my company. But I'm in a different market. I have a different level of experience. I have different talent, like you said. An agency really only after you get past the part of I think like Walter, you guys probably scaled past that point of like the owner pulling himself out of the strategy. Once you get past that point, it's all about the people, man. It's all about the people who are working at your company. And you're only going to go as far as the talent level that you can get in and then sell and mark up, what have you. So, it's always fascinating to me to see how other agencies do it. Like I'm so much less about the tactics and I'm so much more about like the organization, the structure, the communication styles, the expectations of the client. Like these are the things that really take agencies from like, hey, we can do content, we can do SEO to like actual powerhouses,
Definitely.
So always
It's crazy.
fascinating.
Like the scaling people is just insane. Like there was a core group of people who started really early on who had gotten used to a working style where the founder of the company is over your shoulder saying, make it better, make it better, make it better. And evolving from that to a point where we have teams of editors and strategy, like that was difficult, and not just because Walter didn't want to let go of it, but because like we genuinely saw quality slip as we tried to move away from that very unscalable process.
And when you say quality, are you talking about like the quality of the writing, the just kind of the overall, like what how do you guys measure quality?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. It often depends on the client. Like, as you know, like every client comes in with their own expectations and constraints and whatever. For the most part, our clients wanted performance. Like they weren't so interested in nitpicking your grammar. Like is this article going to get us traffic or not? That's most. So that was what we were always shooting for. And so from the beginning. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm assuming that's organic traffic. Was that like their main?
Correct.
Okay.
That's the main thing. Actually, over the last couple of years, that's changed a little bit, which is kind of, I guess, a whole other thing. But like for the most part, that's what folks want. So from the very beginning, we required Google Analytics access. And we said, like, you got to give us the opportunity to see how our stuff is performing so that we can do better work for you.
Of course.
So that was the main thing. But like when I first joined Animalz, I was extremely skeptical of what Walter told me, which was that we're going to do the best content in the world. And he sent me some examples of stuff that like folks on the team had written like within the first couple months of the company. And I was like, damn, this is actually really good. Like, I'm really impressed. I want to know how you're doing this,
Can we just real quick, I want to finish that, but
yeah.
What are you looking at from like a content quality? You're just reading an article. Was it like the research that went into, was it like the presentation of the article? Was it the writing? Was it just the fact that it performed so well? Like what in your mind was like, damn, this was really good?
It's it's so interesting. It's the thing that I noticed then, which is the same thing I'm looking for now as I'm like screening people for Superpath is there's a huge difference between an article that follows an SEO brief to the T, and maybe is actually like covers everything in depth and maybe will even perform well versus an article that is kind of surprises you. Something in there is like really not obvious. It's, it's maybe a little controversial there, and I found that in the first couple of things that Walter showed me. Gotcha. And that was like, we shot for that in every single article we wrote. Like, do we hit the mark every time? No, but like that's what we're going for, is to like deliver that thing that just, it doesn't look like anything else you've seen before. And that's kind of what I was alluding to when I was saying you can look for things in writing samples, whether someone is very junior or very experienced. Is like, if they talk about an idea in a way that you've never heard before, like that's a sign of like strong critical thinking skills. You can kind of help someone refine their techniques. But like that's the thing that you want to see,
And how did you mitigate that though, working across? I think so just for context before I ask this question, is that at the agency do not write content. We do a lot of content strategy. We'll basically deliver you like we call them page level SEO recommendations, content brief, whatever you want to call it, very detailed. But we won't write content anymore for so many reasons, because we like to say that we operate in an area where we don't want there to be an opinion. It's black or white. Is your traffic going up? Is it going down? And when it comes to content, when it comes to design, there's too much room for opinion, and opinion on the client side usually means changes, edits, more work, less money, right?
Yeah.
So the reason why we got there though was because we said we either have to be only work with one type of company where our writers can all be true subject matter experts, but like we can't work with an e-commerce website that sells makeup and then also a lawyer and like expect to use the same writer, you know?
Interesting.
How did you, well, I mean, like you tell me, like, how did you guys get around that? Because you figured it out, it seems like.
Yeah, that is really interesting. To us, it's so often not about the subject matter, but it was so often about relying on the same handful of content principles that made the writing interesting. And actually, as we expanded the subject matter types that we would write about, that actually got easier, because it's really difficult to keep repeating the same handful of formulas in, B2B sales or whatever. Like it's tried, it's done, everyone knows it.
What are some of those principles as an example? I mean, is it like a content format, or is it like a research strategy? Because I think because like attorneys is one of the ones that we've always struggled with, because attorneys have a very specific writing style too, right? They actually want it to be boring and dry as hell. Like,
yeah.
So how did you like bend your framework to that too, I guess?
That's a good question. Some clients, whatever, it doesn't work for them. And certainly we came across that.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things. So there's a 150 slide deck that we put together that covered all of those things. And when you sit down to write an article, you have at least 150 ways that you can kind of manipulate this thing to make it more interesting. Like the thing, we stopped using this language because it wasn't the right language, but very early on we said, we're going to make content crack. We're going to give people this stuff and they're going to say, I want more of that. Like, that's what I've never seen that I want. And like, for obvious reasons, that just like wasn't the right analogy.
Yeah,
but
gotcha.
I would say one key one, actually Animalz, they just wrote a blog post about this the other day, that we would harp on quite a bit, is high concept ideas. Okay. And if you come up with a high concept idea, the blog post writes itself. Like many years ago, we wrote a blog post for a client called, what was it called? It's called something like Why Trello Failed to Become a $1 billion company. Right after they were acquired by Atlassian for, $500 million. And that was probably the best example of a high concept idea that we ever came up with. Like the headline was so clear that the article basically wrote itself. You know what I mean? We were always shooting for that. It was like surprising. It was not obvious.
So question on that though. Sorry.
No, that's good.
Because I've actually noticed this. One of the reasons why I actually have always loved and followed the Animalz blog is because when I read it, it's written for your audience, not for search engine. Like you said, I mean,
definitely. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? There's SEO topics that you want to do as an agency because it's going to get the more traffic, but there's no way that you can get around from doing like, it's a top 10 article. Like it is what it is, you know what I'm saying? But it's going to drive qualified visitors you can remark to, et cetera, right? But I felt like a lot of the content on the Animalz blog was speaking specifically to like problems that you guys have been hearing. Just it's very apparent that it was written from like people who knew what they were talking about with no fucks given about keywords, right?
Definitely.
Which is usually the best type. It's more topical, again, it's more relevant. But if you're doing that for a client, then how are they like, it's not going to rank for anything. So like, are they looking at that as like an advertising asset or like something they can share with their email list? Like it's a really great article, but you probably know that there's going to be a very small chance it's going to get traffic unless you promote it, right?
Definitely. I got so many thoughts on that. the first, so the first sort of caveat, which is that Animalz, like I mentioned, is a low volume business. SEO doesn't really matter that much for Animalz. If over time they choose to invest in, keywords and whatever, that's cool. But I genuinely believe that in order for that business to grow, the stuff that lives on the Animalz blog has to be a bunch of really high concept ideas written for people who work in, senior level content roles. And if it fails to meet that, it doesn't matter how much traffic you get. Yeah. The Animalz blog drove a shitload of leads, and we got very, very little organic traffic. Like probably over the couple years that I worked there, I bet 10% of our total traffic came from organic. That
So
was always kind of
where's the traffic coming from?
all over the place. You know, we got a lot of traffic from Twitter specifically. We got a lot of traffic from our newsletter, which we built up over the years. We got a lot of, one thing that we would hear on sales calls all the time was, oh yeah, my friend shared this with me on Slack, or they emailed it to me. You know, a lot of that, like it was very, it was a long tail.
Yeah. Gotcha.
That was great. And to be honest, like that was my responsibility for most of the time I worked there, was to manage the blog. And, but I was also doing sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was getting this like very direct feedback.
Gotcha.
You know, either I'm hearing from people, oh, you know, you wrote this blog post, we have that same problem, and that's why we're here.
Yeah.
You know, or I'm not hearing about it and I'm wondering, did anyone read that? Does anyone care? You know, so like that was how we measured whether or not that stuff was working. So it may be different for a SaaS business that they need volume. They have to get 1,000 free trials a month, and they have to reach a broader audience. Yeah. The other thing though, is that we found this for ourselves, and we found this for clients all the time, is that it's a lot easier to build links to a piece of like a high concept piece of content, and that rising tide lifts all ships. Mm-hmm. Like it's just genuinely difficult to build a link directly to a piece that is obviously created for SEO purposes.
Yeah.
You know, so we always kind of use this indirect method of like, create a handful of things that just kind of like, the idea is like you blow someone's mind, mm-hmm. and then let that tide lift the whole ship. Gotcha, yeah. And that worked really well for Animalz, and it worked really well for a lot of customers too.
And did you guys, so you work with clients of all shapes and sizes, right? Because you said, I think Google's, I saw on the list, mm-hmm. you work with some really, really big brands too. Yeah. So do you apply like you have the same principles, but is there like a different kind of strategy and approach? Again, like you talk about if it's a big SaaS company, are you going to do like a high concept kind of like thought provoking piece? I guess one that's controversial, I guess is a good way to put it, because I fully believe in controversy in content marketing. It's the best way to get stuff shared, with certain ethics applied to it, of course.
For sure, yeah.
But I mean, did you kind of like, did it matter like an e-com versus Google versus attorney?
Yeah, it definitely changed over time, where like early on, like we were so new and small, like the only people that would trust us to do their content were other new and small companies, and they would just give us free reign, just try whatever we wanted. And then as the company grew and we started landing bigger accounts, you know, they're far more risk averse. You know, like working with a company like Google, we worked with Amazon, we worked with GoDaddy. Those companies have very, very different perspective. Like, to the point, occasionally, not always, where like they want to run non-controversial content past the legal team to make sure that it has been properly de-risked. And that we always found that to be frustrating, because like for the most part, the more you de-risk it, the more boring it is. Mm-hmm. You know, at the same time, like some of those companies came to us with very specific requirements. So like for one of them, for example, you know, was a product, all they want, there was no free trial, demo only. They want demos, and they want leads in the hands of a sales team who could then work them. So there was kind of in sort of another example, like there was really no need for SEO. Like we needed to create like bottom of the funnel content. We needed to do case studies. Yeah. We needed to like get on the phone with their sales team and like understand like what are the conversations with prospects are like, what are they learning, stuff like that. So there were still opportunities to create really interesting and useful content, but it didn't have that same like sex appeal, you know, for lack of a better term.
What I was actually going to ask you was, like for some of these large brands, I know you can't speak about the specifics, so I won't ask, but like, were you mainly working on like blog content for them, or was it more like collateral for different parts of the business, like sales collateral, you know, like case studies, stuff for the website, like maybe even like product pages or something, you know, like, or was it like blog resource content?
It definitely varied from one case to another. One thing that happened, it did vary. We were increasingly actually pushing people towards more of the bottom of funnel stuff over time, because a gap opened up that we noticed, which is that like a lot of these companies now have content teams, and those content teams have been tasked with top of funnel traffic. Like that's what they're out there to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nobody around to help the sales team and the product team. And so like that was a role we ended up filling. And so as we noticed that, like that we leaned into it.
Yeah.
So that varied quite a bit. And then a lot of those companies also, because they have kind of onerous vendor approval processes, once they got us in the door, they would start asking us to do all kinds of random things because like we're already there. And for them to go find another vendor to do some writing related work would take them 6 months to do. So it was like, just get Animalz to do it. So then it was cool because then we started writing landing pages and emails and took over some of their social accounts and things like that, which were, close enough to our like core expertise that we could do a good job at it.
Got you. Just checking for some more questions. Is there anything else that you want to chat about while you're here? Anything else on your mind?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, there's.
I mean, what do you have for your new company? How do you plan to market it? Are you going to take a content specific approach? I mean, similar approach that you guys are using at Animalz, or what?
Definitely content, but different in this case. So like in this case, I feel like volume is going to be really important. Like at Animalz, if I could reach 24 prospective customers, that was actually fantastic. You know what I mean? In this case, like I want every person who works in content marketing on this site. So I'm going to have to do some different things to make sure that happens. Definitely will be very, very heavy on the content though.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, content, it's funny because, so the Blueprint, so there's 3 companies in me and my partner's portfolio. The Blueprint Training is one of them. Weber's Agency is another one. And then we're building like this, well, it's pretty much done, but this platform to do analysis in Google BigQuery, which is for like enterprise clients, what have you. But all like the commonality between all 3 of those companies is the need for content. And it's different for each company too. Like for the Blueprint, the content I'm creating is all advertising collateral focused, right? Like what is the top funnel content that's going to get someone's attention, get them to the website, help me build my remarketing list. And then what's the mid funnel conversion piece? Is it a webinar? Is it a free trial? And then finally we're doing like also like a demo. So like optimizing all parts of the funnel with content specific. Like I could give a shit about organic traffic. Like we just don't have the time or the bandwidth right now to be focusing on like top funnel keywords that really aren't going to drive too much value to the businesses where they are right now. But then the software company, we're also offering like a consulting service on top of it because it's not a confusing service, but it requires so much education. Like most people don't even know what BigQuery is, let alone how they can apply it to their business or agency. So for that, I'm creating a lot of educational content. That's a little bit more top mid, but it's like, how can I first introduce you as an agency person to the concept of BigQuery? And then how can you apply that to your agency? And then what are the outputs, what are the benefits, blah, blah, blah. So that's a lot more kind of like education based. And then also sales collateral because we're selling a much more expensive service off the back of it. So the constant need, like after they become the first touch point, like what is the content that we need to then send them manually one-to-one via email, like the case studies, the stories, like all that stuff. Is really important, and it's different forms too. It's video. It could be like a landing page. It could. There's just all sorts of different stuff that it's eventually we'll get to the point where we can just hire someone to be like, yeah, find its keywords and write content. But like we're not quite at the point yet where like we're still trying to figure out like that bottom funnel piece first, and then once you have that figured out though, then it's just turn the gas on with top funnel traffic.
Definitely. What you just described is something that like we just saw people missing over and over and over again at Animalz, which is that like you have to take a close look at the business and then build a nuanced content strategy around it. Like we saw a lot of customers who came in and said, we're doing content marketing, it's not working. And they're all doing the exact same thing, which is just right out of the gate, chasing keywords. Maybe they got traffic, no one converts. They don't understand why traffic's growing, but conversions aren't. And then it's like, you look at it and it's like a total mismatch. Like what they're doing is not the right thing for whatever their business is.
For sure.
So yeah, no, I love that like nuanced approach to it.
Definitely. All right, Jimmy, I appreciate you coming on, man. Taking the time. I know you got a lot of stuff going on with the new company launch and everything. So tell the people one more time who you are, how they can find you, and where they can get some more information on your company.
So the best place now is superpath.co. If you go there right this minute, you will see a website that is still under construction, but should launch in like 3-4 days. So I apologize for that, but you can at least get a taste of what it's going to look like. Job board, newsletter, podcast, content, all that good stuff. Courses all coming just in the next couple of weeks. So people want to check it out, that's the place to do it.
All right, Jimmy, we'll be in touch. I'll touch base with you offline, but I think there's some stuff that we could potentially collaborate in the future. Now that you're in the training space, man, happy to have you here.
Awesome.
Plenty of customers to be had.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me on.
Take care.